First, I propose that the American republics begin on a vast new 10-year plan for the Americas, a plan to transform the 1960s into an historic decade of democratic progress. We reaffirm our pledge to come to the defense of any American nation whose independence is endangered. As confidence in the collective security system of the OAS spreads, it will be possible to devote to constructive use a major share of those resources now spent on the instruments of war.
We all know that there have been problems within the Alliance for Progress, but the accomplishments of the past 3 years have proven the soundness of the principle. The accomplishments of the years to come will vindicate our faith in the capacity of free men to meet the new challenges of our new day.
How well is the police force geared for this type of search?
Well, the police force is geared very well, we think, because we have the men available, the equipment available to do the job, and certainly the police force is there to serve the public in this type of thing.
Are there any officers who are specially trained to direct this sort of search?
Well, all police officers, by virtue of their rank and experience, are in a very good position to be able to organise this sort of thing. And naturally it follows the more experience they have, the more best fitted they are to carry out this sort of job.
What other resources are at your disposal?
Well, we find that generally the public are very good in offering all sorts of resources. Well now, you take the civil defence authorities, we had particularly great help from them, and one, I'm sure that the police department is very, very grateful to them. They offered the use of trained communication officers, which gave us valuable radio assistance, and more importantly, it allowed the police that would normally man those communication links to be freed for the job of searching.
How much use can the general public be in a search?
Well, the general public can be of immense use, but there again it all depends on the type of search. Taking this week's search as an example, the public is of not much use. I don't mean that to discredit the public, but we have in mind that trained bushwalkers are essential. The forestry came forward and helped, and those are the type that whose assistance was greatly appreciated.
Do you ever find that you're offered more help than you actually need?
Yes. At times we are most embarrassed by the amount of assistance that the public has to offer.
Who pays for all the cost in running a search?
Well, naturally the police department and the civil defence authorities defray their own costs. Now, people with resources, Mr. Jim Story of Station 2 HD offered the use of the light aircraft, and that cost, which was free to the department, of course, is borne by his station.
This week's search began in quite a small way and got progressively bigger as time went by. Is this usual?
Well, it is normal because often the first information that is received by the police officers must be investigated, and after thorough investigation, well, of course, things start to grow, and in this case it grew to rather great proportions.
From the point of view of the person who is lost, what are the best things for him to do?
Well, always, if a person is lost in the bush, the first thing to do is to remain where he is. The second thing to do is, if he has any means at hand of attracting attention by fires, and the third thing, of course, is to look after himself and try and build some sort of shelter to shelter in out of the weather.
I think the double is extremely unlikely. I think it's very hard to deceive so many people, and the kind of people who can't easily deceive and who probably wouldn't let it go. He looks, as far as one can judge, he looks fairly healthy. He looks chubby and rosy-cheeked. He moves slowly, but he moves. He doesn't speak much in public. But on the whole, his health looks reasonable for a man of 70. There's no specific illness that one can notice. But there's always a doctor or nurse hovering within a few feet of his elbow when he does appear in public. But I've never yet seen them actually having to go to action.
There has been reports of Min Piao also being in ill health. How do you feel about that?
Well, when you see him and Mao together at a public appearance, he always looks the paler and more drawn of the two. But on the other hand, he speaks and moves with much greater ease than Mao, it seems. He is, after all, 15 years younger, or 14 years younger.
Is the army fully behind Mao?
As far as one could tell, in the public image, yes. But I think, in fact, in some of the outlying provinces, the army follows its own commander, its own local commander, in places like Xinjiang and Tibet, where the local army commander is also the party chief. Therefore he's torn in his loyalties, one towards the party apparatus, secondly towards the high army command. And although he shows a general loyalty to the communist leadership in Peking, the local army commander may not always follow to the letter in more outlying posts the latest directives of the Cultural Revolution.
The demonstrations outside the Soviet embassy were serious, or appeared so here. How did they appear to you as an eyewitness?
Well, they were very, very tough, and yet always stopping short of extreme physical violence. Russians who ventured out of the embassy during the 2-week siege tended to get surrounded, often spat at, harangued for hours on end, sometimes as long as 6 or 7 hours in freezing cold, but never actually beaten up. Their cars were pounded, the flags were ripped off cars, but they themselves, they always stopped short of actual physical violence against Russian people. There were wild scenes. It was often very unpleasant for correspondents down there, or anyone going anywhere near the embassy. You had to shout about the hubbub that you weren't Russian, so as to save yourself from being surrounded with yourself for 6 or 7 hours. It was a tumultuous time, but again, just with a minimum of control, the minimum necessary.
The activity, the mass activity of the Red Guards in recent months has been called off. Is there any likelihood of this being resumed in the near future?
There were signs just as I was leaving earlier this month that there was a slight stepping up. There were posters, again I don't know how reliable, quoting the leaders as saying you should give the masses their head more and the army's been going too far in exercising control. There have been 1 or 2 indications of that, and this has come at the time when the demonstrations have resumed against some leaders, notably Liu Shaoqi, but also the Party Secretary General Deng Xiaoping, and a couple of vice premiers. And as these demonstrations resumed, there was a little more, what shall I say, the Maoist Red Guards and Red Revolutionary Rebels, who are the adult equivalent to the Red Guards, were given their head a little more, but it's still under much more control than in the early stages. Difficult to know whether they may come back in the summer, after the harvest. At the moment, I think their chief attention is towards the harvest.
Mr. Murray Finley.
That's right.
Now, if you just put your arm down here.
Right, this is the first time I've ever given blood, so perhaps you'll tell us just what you're doing as you go.
The first thing we're going to do is to put this tourniquet around your arm. This is just to block off the return of blood along the vein, so that once the needle is in the vein, it'll flow down into the bottle there.
Gee, that's not very tight for a tourniquet. I thought you had to...
No, we're only blocking the venous return.
I see.
You just hang on to this little squeezer.
What's
I'll
this?
tell you what to do with that.
Oh, all right. Okay.
Just hang on to it tightly now, if you would.
Right. Is this going to hurt?
We're just going to feel a little prick with the needle while we put a bit of local anaesthetic in. Little prick.
Oh, nothing. Righto, well, that was just like any other injection then. That was, in fact, just a normal injection, wasn't it?
Just a little bit of local anaesthetic.
into the skin. That's
Mhm.
the deadness. And we put the larger needle in.
Right.
I'll put one end into the bottle. So.
So the blood, in fact, actually comes out under the impetus of the patient's own heart, does it?
Right. There we are now.
Well, it's in already.
It's in already.
I didn't even feel that at all.
What I want you to do is to squeeze and count 2 slowly and relax. Count, say, 3, 2, 3.
1,
like that.
2,
Just do
1,
yourself.
2, 3. All right, I see.
The whole idea is that you act as a sort of a pump.
How much blood do you normally take?
Approximately 500 cc's, that's around about the pint.
Mm-hmm.
And
And
the first donor, slightly less.
why is that?
Well, first time up you usually take a little bit less so that there's no fainting effects.
Is this a,
Happens very occasionally if you take too much too quickly and people sit up too quickly. They sometimes faint, but as I say, this is a not very common occurrence at all.
now what's happening to that little sample of blood that was taken from me just before I
It's
came out
being
here?
measured to see whether your hemoglobin is normal and whether you're anemic or not.
I see.
If you're anemic, we don't take any blood.
Now, you don't find that many people have any problems. Do you find that most people are able to give blood?
On the whole, yes, I think.
I noticed that we have to run through a list earlier of diseases that may have some effect. But they're a fairly comprehensive list. For instance, even anyone who's had hay fever has to state it. Whereas this?
It depends on the degree of hay fever whether we take the blood or not, because it sometimes, or for a multitude of reasons, can induce possibly further attacks of hay fever in a given individual. The blood itself is probably quite all right. It's just from the point of view of the individual.
I'm noticing a faint, some sort of sensation in the arm there now. Finding it a little bit hard to squeeze on this pad.
It's probably because this has been locked off.
How long does the whole process take?
5 to 10 minutes.
And this is pretty standard for all patients?
You're about halfway there now.
Really? Well, it certainly is a pretty painless process. I've been expecting all sorts of dreadful things. Do you find that people are, before they've been here, are rather poorly informed about this?
No, yes, they are. I don't really think they know quite what to expect.
Oh. Well, I can certainly say that so far there's been no problem. It will remain to be seen how I feel in a few minutes' time when I have to get up again. What happens after that you've finished taking the blood then?
I'll lie there for a few minutes and you sit up. And once the puncture hole has stopped bleeding, you put a band-aid on it and you slowly take yourself over to the refreshment department.
What then happens to the blood?
Well, the blood's taken over and put into the blood bank refrigerator. From there it's confirmed, it's checked to make sure there's no abnormalities, blood groupings confirmed, and available for use when required.
I'm told that in fact for several days after giving blood you feel marvellous. Does this mean that your system actually appreciates having a bit less blood for a while?
That's a hard one.
Several of the fellows at work who have given blood have said that for about 3 days afterwards they felt really wonderful. So I'm looking forward to it to see whether that's the case. How are we going? I'm still trying to count my 1, 2, 1, 2, 3.
No, that's just a rough.
And how often do you normally take blood from a donor?
Not more often than 3 monthly intervals. Usually a little longer.
So he could normally expect to be called upon perhaps a couple of times a year.
I think so.
Once the tourniquet off, I can put the...
Just keep the arm steady.
Oh.
That's the most painful part of it.
Taking the sellotape off. Yeah. I didn't even feel that.
This is just putting some blood into 2 little bottles, one for future cross-matching purposes. The other tests that we do. Squeeze a little bit. Just squeeze your hand a little bit.
This causes it to spurt out, does it?
Good. You can relax now.
Right. All finished.
Now, if you just bring your other hand over and put your finger on there.
Yes. Well, so far it's been going pretty well. From the patient's point of view.
That's the main one.
Is there any particular preference for which arm you take it from?
Depends on which has got the best veins in the hole.
Well, I'm out relaxing now, and my hand's reasonably steady. And Dr. Callow, medical superintendent, how many donors have you got now?
We have about 6,000 donors on the panel at present.
And you find that this is becoming insufficient?
Yes, this is becoming insufficient. The actual number of donors has increased gradually over the last few years, but our need for blood has increased much more suddenly, so much so that there's been about a 50% increase in the demand for blood from our blood bank.
What are the main uses to which you put the blood you take here?
Well, the blood is, first of all, with regard to hospitals, it's used both here at this